Yeah, thanks for having me first, guys. Louise wrote me into this. I'm always Louise has this power to be able to just get me to get involved in stuff because she's just so nice, and I always want to get involved in things that she's organizing because they're always so valuable as well. Um, so yeah, as Samantha said, I want this to be relatively informal, so I'm gonna maybe talk for maybe 10 to 20 minutes about, I guess, my kind of career progression, right from how did I get involved and interested in, well, research really was the main driver for me. And the kind of progress that or the kind of path that I've taken throughout my career over the last, God, nearly 20 years now. That's going to start to make me feel old. Every time I reflect and think about all of these kinds of things, I start to feel older and older. Um, so yeah, so as Samantha said, currently I work in industry. I have my own consulting company in which I provide research, data, statistics consulting for people who are interested in either conducting research themselves or whether they have data that they're looking to gain additional insights from. I mostly work within the kind of health, exercise, and kind of sporting industries. Although I have kind of ventured out into other areas as well, such as kind of gambling and things like that. Um, and I'm currently, as Samantha said, full time as head of research for a company called MacroFactor, who are they essentially provide a diet and nutrition tracking app. We also got a new exercise tracking app launching in the new year as well. And they're a very kind of research and data focused organization, so it's a perfect role for me. Um, but I guess let's take it back to the start. So where did I kind of how did this journey first start for me? Well, originally I never planned on doing any of this, as I'm sure any of you who fall into these kinds of roles have experienced as well. You never quite plan on doing exactly what you end up doing. But to be honest, I never planned on really doing any of this at all. I was a college student. I did my A levels in business and accounting and maths, and I thought I was going to venture off into the financial world and have an incredibly high paid job in banking or something like that. Until I realized that was incredibly boring and that didn't really muster much libido in me or enthusiasm. And so I ended up doing an undergraduate degree in sport and exercise science at Solent University. In fact, I was in the first cohort through that brand new degree. Um, and one of the things I'll stress just in terms of my kind of career progression is I'm very conscious of the fact that I have been incredibly fortunate throughout my career to just be in the right place at the right time and be able to recognize the opportunities that have come across my vision and take advantage of those. So I feel incredibly kind of lucky to have been in the positions that I'm in. And then, as my wife bugs me to say, I have at least like worked hard to kind of develop the skill set to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. But very, very aware that I've been incredibly fortunate. But starting in that new kind of starting on that brand new degree course meant that I was afforded a lot of opportunities to, at a very early stage, get involved in data related projects. I was afforded the opportunity to get involved in some of our lecturers' research projects at the time, and that really kind of developed in me an interest in research and in trying to use data, collect data, and design research to be able to understand the world around us and understand what it is that we're doing. And at the time, of course, that was sport and exercise for me, and it still largely is. But it was really that kind of set me off on this path of trying to develop the skills to be able to essentially answer questions that we have and collect data in order to be able to draw inferences to answer those questions. So during my undergrad, I got involved in as many kind of research projects as I could, as many kind of opportunities to collect data and test athletes and patients and so on in our labs. And that led me into doing my PhD, which was primarily in kind of clinical exercise science. But it was during that process that I really then started to to question some of the ways in which we kind of collected data, handled data, and analyzed data, and drew inferences from that data. And I think it was stepping into my PhD that really set me down what I think has largely been kind of captured under broad banners such as the kind of open science movement or open research movement, the kind of methodological reform, all falling under so-called crises like the replication crisis and credibility crisis and so on, which was slowly kind of moving its way from broader social sciences into adjacent fields like sport and exercise. Um, so I finished my PhD. I stepped into an academic role and spent most of my career as an academic. I was primarily in kind of research positions, and in those research positions, I started to also. I think this is where I really sort of started developing more of what would I now reflect on as being a kind of data stewardship role, more broadly than just focusing on kind of my own data, well, not necessarily my own data, but the data that was involved in the projects that I was running and delivering myself as part of, say, my PhD or other projects. And I started to fall much more into this kind of, without realizing, this kind of consulting role. Even internally in the academic institution that I was working at, I was often seen as the data person to go to. But yeah, I found myself kind of, without realizing it, falling into this kind of role because I took the opportunity to try and develop my own understanding and expertise in those areas in order to facilitate the work that I was doing, but then realize that I had this skill set and experience that would be useful to my colleagues and others as well. So that kind of really set me off down on this more kind of um, research kind of management and data stewardship, I guess, kind of role as well on this kind of consulting pathway. So I took on roles such as kind of mid and senior leadership kind of roles in research at Solent University where I was based, and I supported a lot of my colleagues and students as well throughout that. So I was running things like our undergraduate and postgraduate research project modules, and a big component of those, and research methods modules, and a big component of those was teaching students and teaching staff about the importance of data quality and data management, and mostly from their perspective, framing it as if you do this stuff right at the beginning, then you save yourself a lot of pain and headaches at the tail end when you want to be able to come to analyze and interpret and utilize that data or even share that data. Um, and so there was a big emphasis on that in the teaching that I was delivering as well, and the support that I was providing. And so yeah, so building on from that one of the things that I found myself doing more and more as well was wanting to be able to typically in the department that I was working at, the institution I was working, we were limited in terms of resources. Like as any of you on the call who's aware of Solent University will be aware it's not a hugely kind of research active university, albeit I was in a department where we were, relatively speaking, far more research active than other departments in the university. But I was kind of yearning for the challenge of being able to work with bigger and better data sets to be able to do some of the work that I was interested in. And so that kind of led me at the sort of midpoint of my career to start venturing out and building these collaborative relationships with other institutions, both academic, but also private and public sector institutions as well, and started to work with either private organizations or not-for-profits and things to try and create these collaborative partnerships to be able to facilitate doing better research. Essentially, I was kind of getting a little bit fed up with the typical sport and exercise science world of very small sample studies and very overly bold conclusions from them with questionable data quality and questionable analytic practices. And so kind of had this drive to want to, as much as I was spending time telling everyone how they should do things better in my close proximity, and publicly as well. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't being seen as kind of a hypocrite in some sense and not applying what I was practicing what I was preaching, so to speak. So I started developing a lot more of these kind of external collaborations, which really then started to open up my career outside of academia and introduced me to the world of working in these different kind of sectors and areas and the kind of unique challenges that they bring along. Typically within the kind of university setting, the experiences that we had of working with data, at least in my field, were, as I say, very small scale studies. We'd run through the typical data management was typically very poor, but there was so little of it that we didn't necessarily need sophisticated solutions to be able to capture and track and store and manage that data. But stepping out into the world of industry and other public sector and not-for-profit organizations, I started to experience bigger and bigger data sets and more challenges with how to manage, use that data in accordance with, things like GDPR and such, and making sure that we are, acting in an ethical manner and acting in a rigorous manner with respect to how we utilize that data. So I started working on some collaborations with a not-for-profit organization here in the UK called UK Active, who are essentially a kind of not-for-profit organization that represent the kind of health, leisure, sport and exercise sector in the UK. And I actually took on a kind of a fractional role with them as the kind of principal investigator for their research institute. Um, and that was really when I think I started working on more projects or when I started to recognize that a big part of my role was explicitly this kind of data stewardship component, whereas previously it was a little bit more kind of implicit. I was just kind of doing it without realizing. Um, as I stepped into this role, I realized that being kind of responsible for the research institute itself and working with a large body of external partners, all with their own different, data management issues that we needed to address and solve to be able to, answer the research questions they had and so on. Data security issues and so on, really introduced me to a brand new set of challenges. And then even on the analytic end of things as well, in terms of how we handle and use those data sets, really forced me to kind of have to upskill in my abilities to be able to actually make the most out of those data sets that I was working with as well, for the research that we were interested in and the research that our partners were interested in conducting as well. One of the unique things that we did do, which was my first real kind of step into building some kind of data resource as well, was we were working with a large organization that produces essentially kind of a CRM software tool for managing referral programs in the health sector. And a large component of that was exercise referral programs. And Public Health England at the time, which I appreciate no longer exists, but at the time they had put out guidelines and a kind of public document regarding the implementation and the evaluation of exercise referral programs across the UK. And one of their key recommendations was currently we have no surveillance system for these programs. We have no idea who goes into them. We have no idea what adherence is, what delivery is like. We have no idea what outcomes are even collected or what those outcomes look like in terms of the potential effectiveness of these programs. And so we started working with this organization to essentially build a database that we would then be able to turn into an open resource for researchers, for decision makers and policy makers who were working in that space and trying to understand how effective these programs are. So that was a really interesting experience for myself as well. We tried to get lots of funding to try and do that and got nowhere with it. So we did it off our own backs and just produced a fairly simplistic but useful tool with longitudinal data for a large number of exercise referral patients across the UK. Of course, we're then getting up to the point where COVID hits us, and then it messes up everyone's career trajectories at that point. working at the not-for-profit and splitting my time between there and still having one foot in the door at the university where I was still kind of continuing to do the same sort of role that I was doing previously, which was this kind of research support and research leadership role. Um, the not-for-profit got hit hard by COVID, unfortunately, when the entire leisure sector shuts and that's your primary source of income, it becomes very difficult. The first redundancy hit me during COVID, and I had to step away from the role at the not-for-profit. But I was fortunate enough to be able to then step back into my full-time post at the university. But at the same time, and this was where my kind of venturing out a little bit on my own started. At that time, a couple of opportunities for just independent consulting came across my desk. And so, again, here's another example of like being in the right place at the right time, knowing the right people. I'm lucky enough that my brother is an accountant. He enjoyed doing it, and so continued with that as a career, whereas I found it boring. He encouraged me to essentially set up my consulting business, which now is a kind of core component of what I do. But at the time, it was kind of very ad hoc. I would have a few independent bits of consulting come across my desk. So I mentioned. I got involved in a project being run jointly by a number of organizations trying to tackle kind of problem gambling in the UK, and they were doing some survey work. So I got involved as a consultant around that, trying to help them with designing their surveys to collect the best quality data that they can and how to analyze and infer the data from that based on the questions that they were trying to answer. And a number of other kind of ad hoc bits of consultancy across the way. But it was only really in the last year that I've kind of stepped into the kind of industry world properly, I would say. But between COVID and up to kind of summer last year, I took a step back in more deeply into working in academia and trying to really refocus my efforts on more explicitly that kind of data stewardship role, guess. And so I continued with leading on the research methods components of our undergraduate and postgraduate delivery and the the actual dissertation modules for both as well. Um, and one of the things I started to focus on was curriculum redevelopment around those to really focus on much more explicitly on the importance of data quality and research design to be able to facilitate the right kind of data being collected to answer the questions that students and colleagues are interested in. One of my biggest kind of disappointments, and to cut that story short, is unfortunately the second redundancy hit me last year, which turned out to be a blessing in disguise in retrospect, but at the time was a little bit worrying. So, as we all know, the UK higher education sector is struggling a little bit at the moment, and I was a victim of one of those redundancies last year. And it's probably my biggest disappointment is one of the big things that I just managed to get over the line, but never managed to deliver was a complete restructure of our undergraduate dissertation module. The have students working collaboratively on group research projects with staff and doing them in what's and I'm some people on the call may know this already, but I'll explain it anyway. Essentially, delivering those research projects as what is called a registered report format, and so we were working with Octopus and also peer community and registered reports to essentially set up the undergraduate dissertation modules such that students would be able to all collectively sign on to these group research projects. The group research projects would be already set up and have in principle acceptance as a stage one project. The students would then be taught all of the kind of background and understand the rationale and the reason for the research project. Everything would be kind of managed through these open platforms such as Octopus and using peer community and registered reports and managing the data through platforms to allow for reproducibility and version controls, such as GitHub and the Open Science Framework and so on. And then they would cumulatively contribute to these research projects. And these research projects might take several years to run. But at the end of it, instead of having, you know, several hundred tiny sample, and let's be honest, fairly crappy research projects where the students never really learn how to do good research because they're never really given the opportunity to be involved in a really robust, good research project. We end up instead with a handful of really well conducted, really rigorous, open, well managed kind of research projects that the students can then go away and recognize as that's kind of how we should be doing things in the field. So yeah, so that was always that's my only kind of regret is that I never got to deliver that, unfortunately, before then redundancy hit. And then we enter the last stage of, I guess, the career, which is I was again very fortunate to have built these relationships with external industry partners early on in my career and collaborated with them on research projects, such that fortunately, when I got made redundant, I didn't have to go looking for a job because as soon as some of these partners and organizations that I'd worked with had found out about me being on the job market, I managed to get snapped up fairly quickly. So I spent a year working with an organization called Keyser Australia as their head of research. They are an organization that run a chain of essentially kind of clinical exercise studios where they offer physiotherapy, exercise physiology, and so on. And they have a very large membership base and they collect a lot of data. And up until last year, they never really had anyone who knew what to do with that data. They had a good kind of IT team with some excellent data engineers who had managed to kind of build out an excellent database for hosting and structuring and managing that data, but they never really had anyone who knew how to utilize that data to be able to actually answer kind of business-driven questions, conduct research, and contribute to kind of knowledge generation in the areas that they worked. And so for the last year, I worked with them on essentially kind of setting up much more of a framework for them to be able to facilitate conducting both internal and externally facing research using the data that they capture. Um, uh, Fast forward to now, though, for the last 3 months, I've actually been working with. I've now moved into a role working with a company called MacroFactor, doing a similar sort of thing. So essentially, I'm going to be building. I'm building up the pipelines and the back end infrastructure to be able to make the most of the data that they've got, to be able to use that data to facilitate insights and improve the app itself, but also as an organization, they are incredibly interested in contributing to the broader knowledge base in the space that they work as well. And so, as part of my remit, I get to work on prospective research and the more kind of quote unquote traditional externally facing kind of research as well. So we're doing at the moment some very large scale living evidence synthesis projects as well. Um, and I should say as well, actually, I didn't mention that, but a lot of my career has been kind of split between working very heavily in kind of directly kind of empirical research and also working on, I do a lot of work in evidence synthesis as well. And I think that's one area where certainly in my field, data management is incredibly poor, and surprisingly so, given that it should be so easy in theory to, for example, curate and appropriately manage and appropriately share data sets that are used for evidence synthesis projects such as meta-analyses. And yet the data sharing is minimal. And when that data is shared, it's typically not usable without a lot of additional work and back and forth with the authors, or just, as I've had in many experiences, just redoing it yourself. So I think that kind of brings me up to today, and so I've kind of probably left out a lot of details there, but yeah, that's my kind of story. And yeah, I guess I'm happy to kind of answer any questions. I guess this is the more important, more interesting bit to get into the Q&A and answer any questions that you have.